Hi everyone, David Aragona here with the September 10th edition of Horses to Watch. And with no racing on the New York circuit last week, we're going to go back about a week and a half to take a look at the final week of the 2024 Saratoga Meet. Didn't do a show last week, so didn't get to cover those final 6 days of racing at Saratoga. And there were plenty of trips that I had to choose from during that final week up at the spa. So I wanted to dive in and talk about a few of these races, particularly some 2-year-old maidens that I think are worth following in future starts, turf races, a lot to cover. We're going to go over actually 4 replays on this Horses to Watch episode, looking back at the final week of Saratoga. And we're going to begin with the Thursday card of that last week, August 29th, the 6th race of the day. And before I show this replay, I just want to mention I'm showing a dirt race from August 29th because watching the races this day, it felt like there was a rail bias that was getting stronger throughout the day on the main track. Didn't seem like it was necessarily present for the first couple of dirt races 2 and 3 on the card, though I think they featured smaller fields and some untrustworthy runners racing on the rail, so hard to really tell. But certainly for races 5, 6, 8, and 9, it felt like the rail was the place to be. And with that, we'll play the replay of the 6th race of the day. And I want to focus on the number 8, Noble Confessor. This race you can see is starting out at the Wilson Chute, going the 1 mile distance. This, I think, was the only actual scheduled dirt maiden race for 2-year-olds going a mile. They ran several of these out of the Wilson Chute, but most of those were races that were reined off the turf. This one actually scheduled for the mile distance, so connections entering to get these horses to go a longer distance. And Noble Confessor was one of a few that was coming out of the maiden race earlier in the meet, won by Chancellor McPatrick, who did come back to win the Grade 1 hopeful on closing day of the meet. Now, most of the horses that ran back out of that Chancellor McPatrick race were disappointing in this Thursday maiden event. And initially, I think a lot of us assumed that maybe that Chancellor McPatrick race was not as strong as it initially appeared. But going back to watch this race in light of that horse's hopeful score and looking at the other races from this Thursday card, I think a lot of the horses coming out of that maiden race were just hurt by a rail bias that they raced wide against in this replay we're taking a look at. And I think one of the horses that was most compromised by that trip was the number 8, Noble Confessor, who you can see heading around the far turn here. He's in the 3 to 4 path, just wide every step of the way. After getting a little bumped at the start, just never really had a chance to get as forward as maybe his jockey would have liked in this race. And you can see here turning into the stretch, he's 3 wide. Is going to hang on his left lead for about the first 16th of a mile of this straightaway before he gets asked to switch over by Arad Ortiz. He also struggled with his lead changes on debut. I don't think he ever changed leads in that first start, racing behind Chancellor McPatrick. But once he does switch over to his right lead, you can see he's actually finishing with some decent interest here, losing ground to the winner, who just scooted right up the rail, but does finish okay across the wire to split the field, checking in 5th this day. I will note, when you're watching the replay of the other horses in the race, the trifecta finishers all rode the rail for a significant portion of their trips. The number 2, Filoso, is that Chad Summers runner who just scooted right up the inside, and he was followed by the number 4, Spurgeon, who I believe was upwards of 30 to 1 in this race. Those two rode the rail for much of their trips and completed a pretty juicy exacta in this race. But I think riding that inside bias might have had a lot to do with the result of this race. And I would definitely want to give another shot to Noble Confessor and other horses that were wide coming out of this trip from last Thursday. Let's move on to a race on Friday's card. This is another dirt race on August 30th. Whatever rail bias was apparent on Thursday had disappeared by Friday, so I don't think that was really messing with the results at all as we get to the August 30th card. The 7th race of the day is the one that I want to focus on. This was an auction maiden special weight event, so horses that had sold or RNA'd at their most recent sale for $50,000 or less. 2-year-old fillies going 6.5 furlongs on the main track. Let's break these runners from the gate. We're going to focus on a first-time starter, the number 4, Very Cosmopolitan, and she is in those red and blue silks towards the back of the pack. She's going to break a little bit slowly here, which you will see from time to time. First-time starters just not totally prepared for that first racetrack experience, leaving the starting gate. And as they move down the backstretch, what I really want to take note of is her action. You can see she's starting to climb a little bit, really not reacting well to that kickback, not necessarily throwing her head about as much as you sometimes see from horses that aren't handling kickback, but you could see with her legs, she's kind of trying to jump over that dirt that's coming into her, hitting her in the chest, and just not moving totally freely at the back of the pack. She's going to start to advance up the inside as she starts to settle into her stride, moving around the far turn here. And her jockey, Ricardo Santana Jr., is going to attempt to split a couple of runners that are in front of him right here. But there's another horse, the number 10, that starts to go backwards and backs up right into his face there. And you can see at about the 5/16 pole, he has to tap on the brakes a little bit, steady this filly, and then get her back to the inside to try to get her to regain her momentum. Now, this was a race that was mostly dominated towards the front end. The winner, the number 1, another cliche, a horse that was definitely cranked up to fire on debut, overcame a less than ideal start to get to the front and just widen from there. Not a whole lot of running going on behind this horse, except for Very Cosmopolitan. You can kind of see she's leaving the screen right now, but she's actually going to run all the way up into third by the time they cross the wire. She is distantly beaten. I think she officially finishes over 13 lengths behind the winner, but does do well to pass about 7 runners in this race to get up into that third place position after having that slight trouble at the start and then climbing on the back stretch, having to navigate some traffic. I just think this filly showed some likable qualities on debut. Now, she was competing in this auction maiden event, despite the fact that she's a daughter of hot first crop sire Complexity. She only sold for $20,000 at her most recent auction. Maybe part of that is the fact that she is an Arkansas bred, so limited opportunities for her to race against state-bred company. We'll see where her trainer Ron Moquette places her next. Maybe she'll get another start against Open Company in the fall. I'm sure that series of Arkansas bred races during the Oaklawn Park meet could be a long-term goal for Very Cosmopolitan. So interested to see where she shows up in her next start. Let's move on to the very next day, the Saturday card of this final week at Saratoga, August 31st. We're going to focus on the 9th race of the day. This was an allowance first level, going a mile and a 16th on the inner turf course for older runners. Let's break these runners from the gate. We're going to focus on the number 6, Barrage. And Barrage does not have a terrible trip by any means, but I just think it was a trip that wasn't quite right for his style and how it looked like this race was going to play out on paper. And when I initially watched it, I thought that Manny Franco, his jockey, was making a tactical error right here by not being aggressive with Barrage at all, because when you handicap this race, it looked like he was one of the potential speeds in this spot, and it just seemed like Franco never really had any intentions to get forward with him. I think a big part of that was the number 10 Laurel Valley showing so much aggression from the outside. And sometimes when jockeys see another rider show aggression and intent to get to the front end, it changes their game plan in that split second, leaving the starting gate, and forces them to take a hold. And there were some other horses to the inside that I think showed unexpected speed in this race. And it might have forced Franco to change tactics. Who knows? Maybe Ray Handel always had it in his head to rape this horse, even though it didn't seem like that was the right plan on paper. But that's not the only reason that I want to highlight this trip of Barrage. This was a race that was mostly dominated by horses that were towards the inside. The horses that complete the trifecta, I think, are the 1, 2, and 3, I want to say. And they are all towards the rail every step of the way. The eventual winner is the number 1, McCullough. The number 3, Ramblin' Wreck, also going to be in the photo with him at the wire. He's saving ground towards the inside and the back of the pack. And Barrage is just wide every step of the way, 3 to 4 wide. You can see right here, he gets spun about 5 wide coming into the stretch. And the other thing about Barrage is that horse in the red cap right to his inside, that was his cover heading around the far turn. And in turf racing, we often talk about horses needing cover to run their best races, especially when they're coming from off the pace. You want to see a horse get live cover to make a run into the race, following another runner, not having a clear path ahead of them until they really have to unleash that burst of speed in the stretch. And the fact of the matter with Barrage is he just had really poor cover moving around the far turn. That number 8 horse that was in front of him, he ends up getting eased in the race. And you don't want to be following a horse that's going in the wrong direction, losing momentum, while you're further losing momentum, going wider than your main rivals around a bend. So I just think all in all, it was the wrong trip for Barrage. He did go off as the slight favorite in this race off the strength of a series of very positive workout reports and even workout visuals as I watched a couple of his drills coming into this race. But I think that even though he was doing well coming in, the trip didn't work out. I still believe this horse has upside coming back into the Ray Handel barn. This was his first start off a trainer switch back to Ray Handel. And maybe this this is the kind of horse that you just want to give him a pass for this trip, and he'll do better in his second start off the switch to right handle, coming likely at Aqueduct, and maybe he'll get a better price than the 3-1 he was this day at Saratoga. Let's finish things up with one more race from closing weekend at Saratoga. This was actually the final day of the meet, Monday, September 2nd. The sixth race of the day was a New York bred maiden special weight event going 7 furlongs, actually one of 2 divisions of this race, actually the faster of the 2 divisions run on this Labor Day card. And let's break these runners from the gate. We're going to focus right from the start on the number 1, Hit the Post. This is a Melanie Giddings first-time starter breaking from the rail, and you can see veered in a little bit at the start, is last after about 100 yards, but this horse is actually going to find his way all the way to the front end by the time they break for the turn, because he is pretty pumped up and aggressive. And you can see heading down the backstretch, he's trying to run up on heels. Luis Rivera Jr., his jockey, is actually doing a pretty good job keeping a lid on this horse, but right here you can see he finds a little bit of daylight between horses and just takes off, and there's really nothing Rivera can do about it. He has to kind of let this horse stride on forward, using energy at a time of the race when you want to be relaxing into your stride and reserving some energy for the finish, especially considering this is a first-time starter going a demanding 7 furlong distance. That's a tough distance for a horse to get on debut in an ideal situation when the trip works out, and this trip didn't really work out for the horse because he just wasn't really prepared to lay out his energy in a smart fashion. He just did a little bit too much on the backstretch, and you can see he's actually still in contention as they move around the far turn, heading on to the quarter pole here. But now Rivera goes to the whip, is going to try to get this horse to find another burst of energy to stay in the mix as they move on to the finish line. It's just all a little bit too much for Hit the Post to deal with on debut. He does battle on pretty gamely to ultimately finish 4th in this race, but you're going to see as they head on into the final furlong here, he is just on empty, doesn't have a whole lot left to continue on with the move of the eventual winner, who was rated off the pace and runs on by them at the end. But I think all in all, this was a really positive, encouraging effort from Hit the Post on debut. This is a son of Cantharos, who actually has plenty of stamina breeding on the dam side. He's a homebred for Old Tavern Farm, and one of many Melanie Giddings horses that ran very well over the final few weeks of this Saratoga meet. The barn was really just on fire with almost everything it sent out through the latter stages of this spa meet. We'll see if that momentum continues into the fall. It just seems like maybe Melanie Giddings has a really good crop of 2-year-olds right now, and I think Hit the Post might be one of them in the New York bred ranks. Just did not get a trip that allowed it to find success on debut, but I do think this is a horse that will be able to break through if he gets puts forth a similar effort with a better trip in his second start. Well, those are all the horses to watch to cover from that final week of Saratoga. Tried to get on as many episodes as I could during the Saratoga meet, even though it was a busy time. But I do think it's a meet that you definitely want to go back and watch a lot of trips, because they will be fruitful in coming months. And if you want to make notes about any of these trips moving forward, you can head on in to your DRF Formulator or Timeform US accounts, open up the notes feature in the PPs, make some notes, trip notes that will show up when these horses are entered back in their running lines in the future. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to Horses to Watch this week, and I'll be back with a new batch of episodes following Aqueduct through this fall.